Hello everyone, welcome to the debut episode of the Prestin Sexton podcast. I'm your host, Preston Newville, and sitting across me is my co-host, Gabriel Sexton. For those who listening who don't know anything about this show, we're called Prestin Sexton. We're a show that covers all things movie and TV related. In today's episode, we will be ranking the movies from the Indiana Jones movie franchise, discussing our top 10 characters from the franchise, and talking about what we'd like to see from the future unnamed Indiana Jones 5 project due to release sometime in 2023.
Well, Preston, I'm pretty excited to be here, and to be honest, I really like this feel we got going in here. We got a pop-up table with a mic on it in a dorm with 2 fold-out chairs. So it's a home vibe. Like, it's a nice, comfy vibe. I'm just happy to be here. I'm happy to be talking about something I love. I love Indiana Jones. All right? Let's get to it. Let's rank them. All right. This is my least favorite Indiana Jones movie. And it's a hot take, because it's not the one you think it is. And I know you know it. And I know you are ready to jump down my throat about it. I know you are. I don't like the Temple of Doom. I don't like it. I think... And I'm not one of those guys that's like, well, the movie was racist, so I couldn't watch it. And things were different, 30, 40 years ago. But watch that movie and try to make it through it and not be like, this movie's wildly racist. They're eating monkey brains, Preston. Monkey brains. And I'm like, it just doesn't feel good. It just doesn't feel good. And there's too much Willy. There's too much Kate Capshaw on that one.
I don't know, I guess for me it always felt like it almost wasn't an Indiana Jones movie.
It doesn't have the right feel, if that makes sense. Because I'm like, the two that are really good they have a very distinct feeling compared to Temple of Doom.
It's like the Temple of Doom, I always got the thing, it was like, Indiana Jones is an archaeologist, and in this movie, he just didn't feel like an archaeologist.
He doesn't feel like Professor Jones. They made him way too kind of James Bond. Like, think of the opening.
Yeah.
He's like, oh, I have the antidote.
And that's the thing, I actually kind of like the, entrance, opening scene.
I think that's good. I think it's a good entrance if that was the first Indiana Jones movie.
Which, actually, it was originally supposed to be in the first one. Like, that opening scene
prequel.
Was supposed to be the opening scene for Raiders of the Lost Ark, but they said it didn't have the right feel to it. So they put it in the Temple of Doom because it's something they just wanted in the movie.
And I guess it's good, but to me, it people forget that the Temple of Doom is a prequel to the Raiders of the Lost Ark. So I guess it works, but I'm like... I don't know. I think it's a good movie. It just is not a good Indiana Jones movie.
Oh yeah, I get 100% what you're saying there. What are some other things you just disliked about it?
The second half is kind of frustrating because it's really driven by Short Round, who just gets on my nerves.
Hey now, be careful what you say about my boy Short Round.
Short Round is on my top 10. I will give a spoiler there. But yeah, I'm like, it's not a movie driven by Indiana Jones, which is weird to me. Then, it's called Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and yet the second half is not very Indiana Jones, because he gets under the whole mind control thing. He has his sword taken by Mola Ram.
But one thing I do agree with you is that Willie's can be really unbearable in this movie.
She, screams and is not helpful ever.
For me, it's like she's almost too much of a damsel in distress. She never really shakes that throughout the whole movie. Do you remember the part where they got the chamber coming down? He's like, Willie, pull the lever, and he's like, I'm going to die. That's an actual quote. I actually love that part.
I think it's funny, but I'm like, Lily is so weird. She's like, Indy, the whole time.
Yeah.
She drives me up a wall.
Honestly, she reminds me a lot of Mary Jane from the original Spider-Man movies. Don't get me wrong, I like those movies. Don't mind Kirsten Dunst at all.
Kirsten.
Okay. But her screaming throughout the whole movie is just...
and that's one of the only things that really drives me nuts about Indiana Jones is that for whatever reason, the Temple of Doom, I don't like watching it. I used to like it as a kid, I just don't anymore. I don't know. It's just one of those things, man. It's just one of those things.
Well, I guess I can discuss my least favorite Indiana Jones movie. And I think this one's kind of the one that almost everyone puts on there.
Universally disliked.
Yeah. And mine's Indiana Jones 4, The Temple of Doom. I will say, I rewatched this movie last night just to kind of refresh myself on it, and I will say, it's not as bad as I remember. I really liked the first half of the movie. I thought the first half was felt like an entire, it felt like an Indiana Jones movie in the 60s. It was great. Harrison Ford's doing his best here. I mean,
he's old.
He's old, but you can kind of tell, an issue with a lot of Harrison Ford movies nowadays, you could especially see it in, the Star Wars sequels, is that he was kind of just done with the character.
He kind of doesn't care. He just doesn't care.
He doesn't care, but Indiana Jones is completely different. You can tell, watching the movie,
his vast difference
that he
into there.
loves playing Indiana Jones.
I remember him saying, he's like, I do not like playing Han Solo. He goes, I just don't like it. And, he actually loves playing Indiana Jones. Loves it.
Yeah, you know how you can tell he hates playing Han Solo?
How, Preston? You tell me.
Because back in episode 2 of the original Star Wars,
Empire Strikes Back,
he wanted to die at the end of it.
Yeah, they were like, that's why they killed him, because we're pretty sure he wasn't coming back.
But George Lucas was like, nah.
We
sell too many Han Solo toys for you to die right
George
now.
Lucas is a great decision maker, clearly. That is sarcasm. That's sarcasm.
A couple other things I liked about the first half of the movie was all the little callbacks, the Lost Ark callback, breaking open the crate and hey, there's the Ark of the Covenant. Just sitting there. Or the Marcus Brody callbacks, you can see in the movie. You could see a painting of Marcus Brody just chilling there on the wall.
There's a picture on his desk too, right?
There's a picture on his desk, along with a picture of Sean Connery himself.
Yeah, which, rest in peace, didn't pass too much long ago, I don't think.
Only a couple months. I think it was about 4 months now.
I want to say I remember it in the summer, and I was like, oh, because I went back and watched Crystal Skull, and I was like, well, that means a lot more now.
Yeah.
Well, that means more.
And I mean, I think they also had a Marcus Brody statue that the car runs into and the head falls off, and then Mutt's sitting there laughing at it, and Indy's like, don't laugh at that. Kind of has that look on his face don't
Shia
laugh.
LaBeouf.
That's my guy.
Shia LaBeouf. Well, what more could anyone want to be?
To be honest, I was just kind of expecting to go back in this movie and hate Shia LaBeouf. Because, he has it. Because, he can be unbearable in some of his movies.
Transformers he's like, just screams. He's manic the whole time.
But I will say, I liked him in this role.
He wasn't bad. I'm like, the character, Mud, is a little annoying, but I'm like, Shia is not bad. Shia is not that bad.
And that's actually one of the things I'm going to talk about, is why I kind of like the Mutt character. Because, it's the 1960s, it was a big thing. West Side Story was a big thing. Grease, different stuff like that. Greasers versus jocks thing,
Yeah. Oh, there's a whole fight scene in there.
I love that fight scene.
I do too.
Because it's kind of it kind of feels like not West Side Story, The Outsiders.
When you're a jet.
Yeah, you remember watching The Outsiders in elementary or in high school? Did you guys?
I don't think we did. No.
Really?
No, we didn't. No.
But yeah, it kind of gave me the Outsiders vibe.
Okay.
And I also liked the bike chase. The bike chase was fun.
I like the bike chase. I like when they're driving through the jungle. I really like that as a scene. And the ants thing is a little disturbing for me. That part it's a little too much, but I do like that movie. I do like it.
But I'm gonna get into the second half because that's where this movie kind of starts to fall on his face for me. Speaking of the chase through the jungle, I wasn't a fan of the chase through the jungle.
How do you not like it?
I guess when it wasn't really the race through the jungle, it was the sword fighting.
That part is a little why is this in here?
I didn't really like it. It felt kind of forced, kind of felt really pretty much unnecessary. I get it, he was a fencer, but I mean,
they only said he was a fencer.
He's dueling with a Russian captain who probably has a lot more experience than he does.
Do you think when people join the Russian army that they're forced to take fencing lessons, or is this just a niche thing that only... what was your name? I don't remember. But
we could just call her Kate Blanchett.
Kate Blanchett, not Winslet. I said Winslet, but Kate Blanchett. Do you think that's something only she would know in the Russian army?
But where this movie kind of started to fall flat was when they visit the first tomb with the Spaniard, and they have like those Indian ninja things. Those were kind of weird. I thought they were very, very weird. The Indians in the mask that kind of acted like ninjas. I don't know. Felt kind of racist to me. I don't know why. Just wasn't a fan. Another thing I didn't like, Cate Blanchett's Russian accent.
Yeah, that is kind of universally disliked.
I wanted to like her character, but I just couldn't get over the terrible Russian accent.
And that's something that, you know, you got to kind of take things for what they are. Because I'm like, there's certain things in the Indiana Jones movies where if you, like, pick it apart, you'd be like, well, the bad guys miss Indiana Jones all the time. It's like, it's a movie. It's a movie.
Yeah. Another thing, I'm going to get back to the sword fighting scene. I didn't like the sword fighting scene because, one, it was also kind of nauseating.
Really?
I don't know why. It was the colors in the jungle and the sword fighting going off and just everything else. I just thought it was a little nauseating, kind of hard to watch because it was kind of everywhere. The rope swinging monkey scene.
That is a little over the top. I tend to forget about that part, and I don't like that part.
That's pretty over the top for an Indiana Jones movie. Even for an Indiana Jones movie. I mean, like, he's done some pretty crazy stuff, and it's like, okay. But Mutt being able to rope swing as fast as three moving cars speeding through the mud. Just
that part is comical.
He kind of was just hanging up there, and he's like, okay, I'm just going to start swinging as fast as vehicles. And it's like...
You could clearly tell he looks around, and he's like, monkey. And then he just goes to work.
So, I don't know. I kind of hated that scene. I wasn't a fan. And now we're going to get to the infamous ant scene. I don't know about you, but that scene scared the shit out of me as a child.
It scared the bejesus out of me. I think I told you that my funny story about the ant scene, haven't I?
I haven't. I want to hear it now.
My dad and I went to a KFC one time, and there was a bunch of ants on the floor. Unnamed KFC. They're out of business now, so they got what was coming to them. But my dad is quite the creative reviewist. He's critic. And I remember he left a review that said this KFC has more ants than the ant scene in Crystal Skull. And they wanted to give him some free food, and he's like, I don't want to eat here. And he refused. He's a bold man.
That's pretty funny, actually.
Yeah, I was like, oh, that's great.
I don't know. I hate it because it's kind of disturbing. Like, watching a guy get eaten alive by ants. Even though they're Russian, but it's like...
they're Russians.
Even though they're like evil and shit, but also another disturbing part was when they crawl into his mouth and they carry him into the hole. I was like, that's disgusting.
Here's the thing though, like in like every Indiana Jones movie, there is a part in there that's kind of like freaky and kind of like gross. Like in the first one, like, the Holy Ghost comes out, and you know the
melts
people
their faces.
It melts their faces off. Like, that's hilarious in a horrible way.
I mean, it's funny because, I mean, they're Nazis, so you don't feel bad for them.
You're like, subhuman doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree.
Also, another thing I hated, the native tribe that chased him through the jungle. That felt entirely racist. Like, I'm not one person to call everyone racist, but a tribe acting like complete animals chasing them down.
Not exactly right.
And that was completely naked.
I think they're trying to give you a callback to the first one in that part, in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't know. It just didn't feel right. You know what I mean?
I agree. I agree.
It kind of just felt out of place.
That's a fair take, actually. I would agree.
And lastly, I don't mind the alien plotline. Like, it's fun. It's plausible, I guess, for an Indiana Jones movie. But the one thing I hated about it was the portal to another dimension.
Yeah, I didn't like that they made it kind of science fiction-y. Because I'm like, let's look at the two, like, all-time really great Indiana Jones. I'm like, what are they hunting? Religious artifacts. And I'm like, Temple of Doom is, I guess, religious artifacts. But they do best when it's more like medieval, like Catholic, Christian type stuff. In my opinion. Bible.
Yeah, I agree. It just felt way too sci-fi for me. It's like, why couldn't they just come from a different planet from space and then just do it?
Mm-hmm. Well,
Well, I suppose or it's up to you. It's your turn now, isn't it? To kind of just say what your third favorite is.
So my third favorite, as you guys probably could have guessed, I really like the Crystal Skull. I mean, I'm not going to talk about it for a little bit here, but I mean, we kind of already talked about it. But the Crystal Skull is like, I just like it. I just like it as a movie. I'm like, I watch it, I have a good time, and there's not a lot where I'm like, okay, that's kind of dumb. But I'm like, yeah, there's the occasional like, that's stupid type stuff. But I really like it. I'm like, Shia LaBeouf in this movie, or LaBeouf, he's good. I don't mind him. Harrison Ford is not bad in this movie. I'm like, he's old, and you can tell he really doesn't give a rat's ass too much, but never has. But it's just good. I'm like, I like it. I have a good time. I'm like, there's a little bit of everything, and it actually, to me, feels like an Indiana Jones movie. And I do kind of get where the hate comes from, because I'm like, it's different. People don't like what they don't understand. And I'm like, yeah, I don't understand bringing in aliens. Who does? Who don't? I don't know. But I do like the movie. There's just certain aspects of it, I'm like, it's funny.
And like I said, I loved the first half of the movie. I thought that was great. But it was just the second half that just didn't sit well with me, I guess.
And that's kind of how I feel a little bit about Temple of Doom, where I'm like, the second half for me, I'm like, oh, it's so boring.
It does get just unbearably boring at points.
Temple of Doom, yeah. Like when they're at the palace, Pankot Palace. I'm like, ooh. Well, we can talk about your number 3 since we're already talking about it.
Well, yeah, you could probably already guess what mine is. Temple of Doom sits at number 3 on my list. You know, I have like a lot of the same gripes that Gabe has about it. Kind of feels borderline racist with all the monkey brains, different stuff like that.
I remember.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest, it's probably not like that over there. They're probably not cutting open snakes and eating other tiny snakes while they're alive.
Remember, there's like they're eating bugs too.
Yeah, they're eating bugs, monkey brains. It was just kind of gross, and it's like, well, it's not actually like that. 2, I do like Short Round. I don't know what Gabe means when he says Short Round's annoying. I love Short Round. Short Round is probably the second best thing in this movie. Just behind Harrison Ford himself.
Yeah.
I kind of can agree it doesn't really feel too much like an Indiana Jones movie in the second half. I can see what you mean when you say it's more like Bond, you know?
It kind of feels like they're trying to get like Indiana Jones to be the American version of James Bond, when in all actuality I'm like, no, just stick with what you're doing because that's already the American version of James Bond.
Yeah, when he was sitting at the table, like, you know, doing all that stuff with the
in Club Obi-Wan.
Yeah, Club Obi-Wan with like I don't know what his name, but the Asian guy, he's sitting there like seems like a Bond villain.
What's his name? I don't remember what it was. My dad always says it.
Yeah.
Lao She. That was his name. It was Lao She.
Was it Lao She?
It was Lao She. Nice try, Lao She.
But he seems just like a typical Bond villain almost. I mean, when he was sitting at the table, I was almost expecting him to go, Indiana Jones. Like, just in, like, completely rip off of Bond. But I will say a few things I liked was the skydiving out of the plane scene.
That is not bad.
That was fun to watch. I mean, whenever they get in the plane and leaves, how he's like, see you later, Lao. And he shuts the door.
See you later, Lao She.
And it's
it says,
like
property of Lao She.
Lao She Airlines or something like that.
Yeah.
Love that scene. That's just funny. I mean, Indiana Jones movies kind of perfected almost, like just subtle humor.
I agree.
But not forcing humor on you.
Yeah, like they're not as quippy as like Marvel movies are.
Yeah.
But I'm like, Indiana Jones, like he just shoots a guy in broad daylight instead of going to a sword fight. I'm like, badass.
Which we will get into later.
Oh, we will. We will get into that.
But I don't know, I just wasn't a fan. Like, Mola Ram was cool and all, but just ripping out someone's heart without... Like,
if you didn't like the ant scene, then you should not be able to like...
See, now, I didn't mind that scene, but it didn't feel like an Indiana Jones movie scene in there.
I like that phrase. Like, it's a good movie, but it's not a good Indiana Jones movie.
So yeah, it's just like I have it at 3. I think it's just a little bit better than Crystal Skull because I think altogether it's a better movie.
That's fair.
So you want to talk about what's number 2 on your list?
Yeah, and when I say it's number 2, I'm like, it is not a close second place. I love The Last Crusade, and I think it is Indiana Jones at its finest. Like, Sean Connery in this movie is actually pretty damn funny. And one of the more fun facts is that Indiana Jones not Indiana Jones, but Harrison Ford, he kind of questioned whether or not Sean Connery could play his father because he's only 15 years older. And like, that would be a little disturbing. So, but nonetheless, I'm like, it worked. I like the movie. It's funny, like the part where he's like, Marcus can disappear. It's a dozen different languages. You'll never be able to find him. And they pan over to him, and he's like, "Does anyone here speak English?" It's hilarious, and it just works. Like, there are so many quotable parts of that. Like, I could hear Sean Connery in my mind going, "Oh, it breaks the heart."
Or, "Son, the roof is on fire." Or, "The floor is on fire."
Like, my favorite one is when he's like, "Well, did they hit us?" After he shoots the plane, he's like, "Well, Sean, they got us." I think it's hilarious, and it's historical. I'm like, you got Nazis, which I'm like, it follows the formula that the first one had, and I hate to say formula because it's very different, but a lot of it is the same, and I think that's why it's really good to me.
And the thing I like about it is that it's kind of plausible. Like, I know some people might not agree, but like God existing, like a cup that could heal people. But I mean, that's something the Nazis did do. Hitler was
He was into that. Like, he thought that was real. He had him out searching.
Hitler actually had Nazis or his soldiers and other people like that, digging up for archaeological finds like that. Like, because he believed in the powers that these religious artifacts had.
Yeah, that's why, like, a completely unrelated movie, but Captain America, like, he's trying to find the Tesseract, and he does. But like, that's such a it's real, and I like the book burning part too is pretty realistic. It's just a fun movie. I'm like, I've said that twice now, but The Last Crusade, like Harrison Ford, Sean Connery together. I love when they go across the desert and they're going up against the tanks and they have the horses.
Love it.
He jams the rock in the tank and the tank explodes. Like, it's great.
I'm surprised one thing you haven't mentioned yet is the inclusion of Sala and Marcus Brody. I mean, those four just have chemistry.
They do. I'm like, Sala, well, we'll get to where Sala ranks, but I mean, it's fun.
Speaking of quotable quotes, Sala, I said no camels.
I said no camels. Oh, I could sit here quote Indiana Jones all day.
Well, I suppose I can get into what my second-rated movie is. And might be a little surprise here, but I actually have Raiders of the Lost Ark at number 2.
That's unfortunate for you.
I know some people might be like, huh, what? How can you put that? How can you put The Last Crusade over Raiders of the Lost Ark? But, I mean, I don't think people realize how much I love The Last Crusade. Like, it might be weird, but it was the first Indiana Jones movie I like. I love Sean Connery, love Harrison Ford, love John Rhys Davis as Sala. I mean,
yeah,
there was just too much in that movie I liked to not have it at 1.
And River Phoenix plays young Indiana Jones, and like that opening scene's.
Did you know that? You know why they casted Rivers Phoenix in that role?
I remember reading it, but tell me why.
Because Harrison Ford himself, when they were looking to cast out the thing, Harrison Ford said give it to Rivers Phoenix because he could do the best job portraying him because Harrison Ford saw him as a younger version of himself.
Wow, that's deep. That is deep.
And it's a shame that Rivers Phoenix died at the young age he was because, like, could you imagine Rivers Phoenix in, like, an Indiana Jones movie?
That's who it would go to now.
As, like, a young Indiana Jones?
I'm like, that's who it would have been. I'm like, Crystal Skull, they would have waited for him to kind of grow up, and then I'm like, it would have been River Phoenix for sure.
And I don't know if you remember, but they actually had a TV show, Young Indiana Jones.
I never watched it, but my dad would tell me about it all the time.
I didn't either. They actually offered that role to Rivers Phoenix, but Rivers Phoenix basically said, no, I don't do TV.
Fair enough.
He said he didn't want to get back in TV, so we were pretty close to having a Rivers Phoenix Young Indie TV show.
Do you think that's what Indiana 5 could be? It's possible.
I don't think so. I think it's going to be a movie.
Do you think they're going to pass the torch, though? Because I'm like, that's kind of what they hinted at in 4, or in Crystal Skull.
We'll get back to this.
Yeah, like, well, anywho, go on. Why do you like The Last Crusade?
Okay, actually, I'm going to talk about Raiders.
I'm sorry. Raiders.
I mean, how can you not like Raiders? I see people be like, oh, well, Indiana Jones was kind of not necessary to the plot because it would have ended the same way. And you know what I tell those people? Shut up.
Shut up. It's great. I'm like, well, what do you want? Do you want Raiders of the Lost Ark, or do you want Indiana Jones?
Like, you know how boring that plot would be if there was no Indiana Jones? It was the Nazis get the Ark, and then they bring it to this island, and then they all die. Like,
yeah, can't wait.
It's like, no, we want to see Indiana Jones, you know, beating up, killing Nazis, finding this Ark, you know. It was great.
I think one of the more underrated fun facts is that Alfred Molina is in this movie.
As Satipo. And actually, it's funny because Harrison Ford messes up his line in the beginning, and he says, adios, Sapito. And then I'm like, well, is that Harrison Ford or is that Indiana Jones? I kind of want to get into that entrance scene. By far, the best entrance scene in all of cinema history, I'd have to say.
I'm like, you can't not think of Indiana Jones and not think of the boulder. Like, where he's, I'm like, it's iconic.
Can you think of an opening movie scene that's better than that scene? Because I know I can't. I mean,
X-Men Origins Wolverine has a pretty great opening scene.
Okay, don't even get me started on that movie.
It is good.
We will talk about that movie maybe on a different episode.
All right, I'll leave it to you.
But I love that opening scene because it just shows you what that movie is going to be like. Like Indiana Jones, this badass archaeologist looking for stuff. Nothing phases him, you know.
And he survives.
Yeah.
And he survives. He beats everyone.
Plus, not to mention, I remember playing the Lego Indiana Jones movie, and that's the opening mission.
I played it too. I played it with my brother.
And having to outrun the ball was a pain in the ass. Because it was like a Crash Bandicoot, basically.
Yeah. I have a funny story about that. My parents, when I was in first grade. My brother's a year older than me. He's in second grade, but he'll attest to this. But we got that for having good grades or whatever, and it was our last day of school gift. We stayed up till like 1 or 2 in the morning playing Lego Indiana Jones, and we set our alarms for like 7 in the morning so we could just hit it right back.
What console did you have it on?
I had it on Xbox 360.
See, I had it on a Wii.
Oh, okay.
It was very fun on Wii.
I can imagine. It was, oh my god, I remember we somehow glitched it. We did something and we had like $48 million. We actually did some glitch and I'm like, oh my god. And we were like screaming about it.
Did you ever find the Star Wars reference?
Yes. You had to find all 5 of them? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And you got Han Solo. Because you'd have Indiana Jones and Lego Star Wars. We're off the rails right now.
Yeah, we are very off the rails.
We're off the rails.
And I mean, Raiders is also kind of funny at some points. Like, one scene, I'm going to get back into the opening scene where he's on the plane with Chuck, and we find out Indiana Jones is
Jock.
Okay, well, he's like, Chuck, there's a snake in the plane. He's just like, yeah, that's my pet Reggie.
That's my pet snake, Reggie.
I hate snakes.
I don't do snakes.
I hate them. And it's like, I just always just laugh at that part because I mean, it's like he's an archaeologist and he's scared of snakes.
Well, it's funny because you don't think of it. Like, what is one of Indiana Jones's like defining traits? Like, he hates snakes, and you find this out like 15 minutes in.
Oh,
like, he hates snakes.
And I can't believe I forgot something from Indiana Jones 4. Another scene I loved in it was when they try pulling him out of the sand with the snake.
He's like, tell me to grab the rope. They're like, but it's a snake. He's like, just say grab the rope. And they look at each other and they're like, grab the rope. I do find that funny.
Back to Raiders, and I mean, let's be honest, Marion, by far the best love interest.
You know, and we talk about female empowerment in cinema a lot these days. I'm like, Marion kicks ass in this movie.
Nothing shows female empowerment like Marion, like the opening thing you see in Marion. Just beating, just pounding down 30 shots of alcohol.
The guy's like, just absolutely like crashes. I think that's hilarious.
And then she gets up, no problem. She just walks that off like it was like she just took 30 shots of water.
Well, she's from Wisconsin, probably.
I mean, it wouldn't surprise me.
It wouldn't shock me. Strong woman like that, no way.
I mean, she's a barkeep. I mean, like I said, she fights off a group of Nazis while her building burns down after taking 30 shots.
She seduces Belloc. People forget about that, but it happened. I won't. It's in my mind.
That's just another scene I love. I mean, what's funnier than a Nazi burning an imprint on his hand?
Yeah, and then you're like, it's kind of like disregarded. You're like, whatever. And it comes back into play.
Yeah. And I mean, of course, we get introduced to Sala, Marcus Brody in the movie also.
Captain Katanga. I'm like, he's on my list based on name. Based on name alone.
That scene's also pretty fun where he sneaks onto the German U-boat.
Yeah, he's the German. Oh, I almost
throws on the uniform that doesn't fit.
I almost forgot to mention the best, most hilarious part that happens in The Last Crusade is when he throws the guy out of the blimp and then he goes over, looks at him and says, "No ticket." And then they all start scrambling to get their ticket
in a suit that's way, way, way too small.
Yeah.
Like, I like this throwback that they keep making to him, like, just throwing on random people's clothes and them not fitting. Because, you know, you see that in a lot of movies where, it just so happens that the one person he beats the piss out of to take their clothes, it just magically fits perfect.
Yeah, I'm like, well, I'm in stats class at the moment. I'm like, let's break this down. I'm like, it's a small chance.
I guess it's something I just always love going back to, and I kind of view it as almost a dig at Star Wars, which is weird because they're both Lucasfilms. But it's like, you know, they randomly just take the Stormtrooper armor and walk around like it perfectly fits, even though they're completely different heights.
Yeah. That definitely is a part where I'm like, it's realistic. That's one thing that I love about early Lucasfilms movies is that they're lived in, is what they like to say, and that they're not squeaky clean. Things aren't just perfect. Things are, they're real, like, in a way, kind of.
And I mean, they feel real. Like, there's no over the top stunts either.
I agree.
Plus, I mean, how can we forget the scene where the people with swords and like those guys are chasing them through the streets in that town?
Iconic scene.
Where, you know, Marion's in a basket.
Frying pan. She had the frying pan.
Destroys that dude with a frying pan, but then gets kidnapped in a basket. They run around. Indy's chasing them. Indy finally starts to catch up to him, and they run into a place where just everyone's holding baskets.
It's funny.
So Indy's, you know, jumping up, knocking over the baskets. They all form a circle around him, and the dude with the sword, you know, doing all these tricks. You think it's gonna be like some epic sword fight. Then he just takes his gun out and shoots him.
Do you know why he did that? I'm sure you know why.
I do know why.
Okay, yeah, because I'm like, well, in case anyone doesn't know, it's because Harrison Ford was really sick, and he didn't want to film that part. So like, he just ad-libbed him pulling out the gun and shooting the guy. That's why, like, you see, and it's like it's a little delayed. Like, the guy didn't know what to do for like a brief half a second. But I'm like, it's an iconic scene. I'm like, that is a perfect Indiana Jones behavior. I'm like, perfect.
Yeah, because it was just supposed to be this long choreographed scene of him sword fighting.
And that's why I'm like, Indiana Jones and Harrison Ford they go together. They just work.
Harrison Ford's just a badass.
But I'm like, if it was anyone else's Indiana Jones, you'd be like, no way.
Mm-hmm. It's like, no way. He's one of those roles that was perfectly casted that you couldn't see someone else playing.
Yeah, I'm like, there are only a select...
Except maybe
few.
Rivers Phoenix.
Like, that's fair, but I'm saying, I'm like, this is one of those things. Like, Harrison Ford as Han Solo is iconic, but, like, I was not that upset when they're like, well, Aldrich Ehrenreich is going to be the new Han Solo. I'm like, Harrison Ford is not very committed to that, so I don't see why.
It's like, Harrison Ford's fedora might be more iconic than Han Solo, and this is coming from a person who loves Star Wars.
I love Star Wars, but I'm like, I just think of Indiana Jones with Harrison Ford. I'm like, it could not be anyone else.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm like, it's impossible.
So, you want to,
talk about number one?
Talk about why Raiders of the Lost Ark is your number one?
I just think it started everything. It's hard to really just jump into a character like that. And, like, obviously the opening scene, like, it explains so much about Indiana Jones without actually saying a lot, which I appreciate in movies. I'm like, make me think a little. Like, don't make me Inception mind bend, but like, make me think. Make me think about, like, well, what does this mean? Like, where he's like, Jock, get the plane ready. And, like, you get Belloc in there too, Beloche, and he's in there, and you just get, like, an over a sense, like, in that opening scene, the overarching feel that, like, Indiana Jones just has, like, that Captain Jack Sparrow type stuff. He just goes along. He just does whatever he wants.
Plus, he's just cool as ice at this point. Like,
yeah.
Indiana Jones is probably the coolest character.
Like, when I was a kid, I played Lego Indiana Jones, and I was like, well, I kind of want to watch these movies. Because I'd kind of seen him, but I didn't really remember him. I'm like, I want a fedora now.
I played it. I dressed up as Indiana Jones for Halloween.
Yeah, and you had to beat the ladies off with a stick, I'd have to assume. I'm like...
I was 8.
Yeah, you think that is any exception, pal? Yeah, don't think so.
And if anyone's questioning it...
Oh, wow.
There's proof right there for you, Gabe.
You do not look like you did when you were 8. Oh, my goodness.
Okay.
You look like a completely different human being.
Maybe closer to, like, 10.
Maybe. I'm like, you look like a completely different human. I have a picture of me when I was 8, and you would be like, oh, that's the same person. Like, when I was 8, you would think the same.
But yeah, so if anyone's questioning, like, oh, you couldn't have liked Indiana Jones for that long. Nah, I played him when I was 8.
It's me at 13. People can't see it. I'm like, my close friends will know. I'm like, it's a picture of me with a birthday cake. And
definitely a glow up.
Yeah, clearly.
Well, we've been talking about Raiders for a while here now. I suppose I can hop it right into my number one on why Last Crusade is the best Indiana Jones movie.
Do you think it's the funniest, just to start it?
Oh, by far the funniest.
I think it's hilarious. I'm like, Sean Connery in this movie is freaking hilarious.
Sean Connery might be one of the only people cooler than Harrison Ford.
He's cool, but, like, he was funny in this movie I don't think he, like, even meant to be that much.
Let's be honest. There's maybe 2 people cooler than Harrison Ford. And that's Sean Connery.
Me and me.
No, and then Christopher Lee.
Christopher Lee was lollipops.
Christopher Lee, I don't care what anyone says, the coolest person in history. And we'll talk about that maybe on another episode on why Christopher Lee is great.
Double the fool.
But we were talking about how it kind of feels like a James Bond movie in the second one. Well, in episode 3, they doubled down on it by giving us James Bond.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
But I just like The Last Crusade the most because it's like, yeah, the Ark of the Covenant is sweet, but it's the Holy Grail. The Holy Grail is the Holy Grail of religious artifacts.
Yeah, like, it's the cream of the crop. I'm like, it does not get any more religious artifacty than that.
Plus, for me, it's just Sean Connery and Harrison Ford. What a perfect casting as Henry Jones Sr. I know people are like, ooh, he's Scottish. Well, who cares?
I'm like, it works.
It works.
Whether you like it or don't like it, it works.
Plus, the opening scene is amazing. Like, it kind of just shows that, like, oh yeah, Indy's been doing this since he was a teenager.
I'm like, this wasn't just something he picked up yesterday, and he's like, okay.
I like all the little callbacks, like, he's on the plane, he's jumping out, he uses magic to get out, goes in the magic box, runs away. He He's going after religious artifacts. He's always had the mindset like history belongs in a museum, not to private.
I would pound it. I would pound this table right now, but I can't.
Because that's like a thing with Indiana Jones. Like most of the time, people would be like, "Oh, he's just a grave robber looking for money," but when really it's like all his stuff goes to museums, not private collections, and that's been a mindset of his since he was a kid. So I love how they call it back. Then I mean, plus like the scar on Harrison Ford's chin.
Yeah.
I think it was a car accident he got that in, or what was it?
I don't know.
But yeah, he has a big scar on his chin. They have a little callback to that of him using a whip at a tiger and it hitting him in the face.
yeah, and plus, like, if you remember in the first movie, the end is, like, you're in Raiders. He's like, well, where is it going? And he's like, it's going to a government facility with top people. He's like, where? He's like, who? And then he goes, top people. And, like, that's the end. They just pan over to I forget the warehouse it's in. I think that part's hilarious, unintentional.
Another thing I like...
Top people.
I mean, I like Elsa. Like,
we've had intimate conversations about this as to why. Like, it's just weird.
Like,
that part's weird.
Like, I know, like, she's a good villain. I don't care what anyone says. Like, it was hilarious that she slept with Henry Jones Sr. before Jr., and then they ended up being like, you know.
Do you think Sean Connery pulls? I'm like, he pulls. He clearly pulls.
Like, that part was hilarious when she's whispering into Indy's ear, but Senior thinks she's whispering to him, so she's like, "Oh, I'm glad you liked it." And then Indy looks over at him like, "Yo," like recognizing like
he's like, "What is going on?"
Did you? And then they're like, "She's like, it's disgraceful. She's like half your age," and he's just like, "I'm just another man."
I'm just another man. Outstanding Sean Connery impression.
It's like, I love the storyline with the whole cup, the Holy Grail. I just blanked out on the name a little bit.
Well, it's not going to be the fanciest one.
You know, the boat fight, the boat scene. That's how you do a boat scene. Like, don't go around it, or don't go through it, go around it. And she said, "You crazy, go through it." And then she goes through it, like in between them, and then he freaks out, and he's like, "I said don't go through them." You know, when the protectors of the Ark are coming at him. And one thing I always hated about the movie is the rats. Like, I'm deathly afraid of rats. I get the heebie-jeebies whenever I see a rat on TV. So, them crawling around with thousands of rats just rolling all over the place, part always creeps me out. But
see, that's funny, because I am terrified of snakes. Like, I see a little garter snake on the ground, I'm like, heck no, hell no. Not a snowball's chance in hell am I staying here.
And speaking of the snakes, another thing the opening scene does great is showing why he hates snakes. Like, in the beginning, he's like, "It's just a snake." And he throws it off to the side like it's nothing. And then, literally 5 minutes later, you know, he falls in the snake. He freaks out a little bit, falls over, and the big snake pops out. And then he's just scared of snakes at that point.
Oh, no, thank you. No. I hate snakes. I hate them.
What are some other things I like? Oh, Sala and Marcus Brody are in it. Like the quote you said earlier, like, Marcus can disappear anywhere. He has people in every city. He speaks 12 languages. And then it just shows back to him, completely oblivious in this country, standing out, yelling, like, "Does anyone here speak English?" Like, it's just humorous. They go back to Berlin to get the book, and they just happen to run into Hitler, and he signs his book.
Yeah, that's funny.
Thought that was just funny. Or when they're on the bike scene again, when they're trying to get away from the Nazis, and you know, Senior's like this uptight old man, and you know, Indy like shoves the pole in the bike, and he's laughing, and Senior looks over at him like,
he's like, "What's wrong with you?" He's like, "What the hell did I do wrong?"
I mean, it just has the humor from Indy, them thinking Indy died, and then him crawling up, and then being like, they're crying, and all of a sudden they're like, "Oh, well, let's get out of here." As soon as they see he's all right.
That part is funny. I suppose we've been talking here for a little bit. I'm like, we could probably breeze through some of our top 10s.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm just gonna list them out. I'm like, I could talk about them, but we've got a lot of time.
Break them down just a little bit, what you like about them.
So I have negative infinity is Willie. horrific. I'm like, if Willie was in the first Indiana Jones, it would not be a classic. That is how much I'm like.
That would have been unbearable. I mean, Marion was a staple of that movie.
She's a strong woman. I'm like, if as a woman, look up to Marion. She kicks ass. I have Belloc at 9. The villains aren't that memorable in Indiana Jones. That's one of my only gripes.
I agree with you. But I mean, the villains are Nazis. Like, they're just kind of generic Nazis.
Yeah. And the other one is, we'll get to it. I have Mutt at 8, just because Mutt was, I guess, he's a very good character. He's very interesting. I don't think they did it right. I just don't think they did.
There was something missing from it.
Like, that second half, I'm like, it's not driven enough by him.
Yeah, I agree there.
And I'm like, should Indiana Jones be driven a little bit by someone else? Indiana Jones? I'm like, no, but like the first half of the movie is like, it's Mutt in Indiana Jones.
And I do love the part where he's like, I quit school. And he's like, oh, you quit school? He's like, yeah, I just want to be a mechanic. And he's like, that's fine. And then he finds out he's your son. He's a son. And he's like, you're going back to college.
That part was a little out of left field.
He's like, well, why? You said to follow your dreams. Or follow what I enjoy. He's like, now that I know you're my kid, and you carry my name.
I have number 7 is Elsa, and I think she could be higher, and my number 6 is almost inexcusable. You're gonna hate me, Captain Katanga, just for his name. Like, if you meet a man named Captain Katanga, I'm like, he will swashbuckle those high seas.
Katanga over Elsa Schneider, huh?
Yeah, Schneider. No thanks. 5 solid, the best digger in all of Cairo.
Plus, I mean, he played what was it again in Lord of the Rings? I mean, John Rhys Davies is just needs to be protected at all costs.
At all costs. Number 4, this might shock you, Mola Ram.
I actually do like Mola Ram.
As a villain, I'm like, he's the most memorable.
He's by far the most iconic villain.
Yeah, I'm like, think of I'm sure there was a Nazi colonel, and I can see his face. Do you remember his name?
No, you're talking about the one from the Last Crusade that falls off the cliff with the tank?
Yep.
I know who you're talking about.
Do you remember his name?
No, nope. He's just Nazi guy in my book.
Right, exactly, and that's where I'm like, Mola Ram. Like, you can see his face. You can literally see him pulling it like a heart out. You're like, Hum Dong Shaba.
Plus, I mean, his name's Mola Ram.
And I'm like, he's got the iconic like headpiece with like the bones and the horns. I like him. I have Henry Jones at 3.
Just senior?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not Indy. Indy's got to be number 1. Number 2 is Marion. I think Marion is just a strong woman, and like we talk about a lot about that in like modern day society of like, we want these strong female characters, and like Marion is overlooked.
That there is how you create a strong female character.
She wasn't a piece of ass. She like hit a dude on the head with a frying pan and like went to work on him with it. I think that's funny. What about you? What top 10 you smoking on?
Okay, I'll start at 1, and I'll get the obvious out of the way. Indiana Jones. I mean,
it's impossible.
Top 5 character in cinema is in my opinion.
Iconic.
And he might be a top 3 in the most iconic characters in film history.
That's a bold take.
I mean, I just love Indiana Jones too much to not have him at 1. Number 2, I got the other Jonesy, Henry Jones Sr.
Okay.
I mean, love Sean Connery, or should I say Sir Sean Connery.
Sir Sean Connery.
He's hilarious in the one movie he's in. I love the connection that, like the father-son connection they ended up making in the 3rd movie. Number 3, I got Sala.
Best digger in all of Cairo.
I love Sala. He's hilarious. He has one of my favorite lines in all Indiana Jones, or was a part of one of my favorite lines in Indiana Jones.
Camels.
Sala, I said no camels. Number 4, I got Marion. Pretty much the same reason. You had her pretty high on her list.
Quick
on your
question.
List.
Did you like the fact she's in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull?
Oh, yeah.
I love that. I think that's awesome.
I'm happy they just didn't go with another generic love interest. Like, they went all the way back and grabbed though everyone's favorite. And if she's not everyone's favorite love interest, there's something wrong
And
with you.
even in that movie, like, she kicks ass. I'm like,
Yeah.
she's
a badass.
She is. I'm like, Mary kicks ass.
At number 5, I'm kind of surprised they didn't make your list, but I had Marcus Brody.
I don't know. I could have maybe switched around a couple. I'm like, I should have switched Belloc, I think, for Marcus Brody.
I loved Marcus Brody. I mean, he had his funny lines. He had his serious lines. He's one of the first characters you're introduced to as the head of the university. When Indy's best friends, they had great chemistry. Him and Harrison Ford. I always found it funny whenever he was helping Indy in the in the Last Crusade in the tower, and they just smack him up the head with the book.
Yeah, I remember that. I do like that.
Number 6, I got my guy Short Round. One of the best parts of Temple of Doom. I know you're probably disagreeing, but
I'm not so high on him. Not so high on him.
Plus, I mean, it's Data from the Goonies. Like, I just like Short Round. I mean, he also has one of the most iconic Indiana Jones lines. Hey, lady, you call him Dr. Jones.
That's funny.
At number 7, I have Mutt, a.k.a. Henry Jones III. I mean, Shia LaBeouf, was fine in the character. I'll be bringing him up as we talk about the next Indiana Jones movie in a little bit. Just enjoyed the character. At number 8, I have Kazim, the dude in the last...
The Fez hat.
Yep, yeah, the guy with the Fez hat, protector of the Grail.
Yeah, it's fair. Well, he's interesting.
Not too much about him. At number 9, I have the Grail Knight, the guy protecting the Grail at the end of the Last Crusade. I mean, his story's just cool, 3 knights walk into the desert, come out 400 years later. He's guarding the Grail. He has the famous line, "You chose poorly, and you chose wisely."
Poorly.
He's just a character I always liked.
I would agree.
In number 10, I got Elsa Schneider. I mean, she had her moments in the Last Crusade where you liked her, and then she played a pretty good villain, probably the second best villain.
Well, she's a Nazi, so don't like her too much, Preston. I'm like, don't like her that much.
Actually, she's Austrian.
Sorry, well, she works with the Nazis, so
yeah.
Guilty by association.
Oh, absolutely despise her as like a human being, but I mean, just an intriguing character. And then I have my honorable mentions. I have Mola Ram, Fedora, the guy who gives Indy the fedora at the beginning of the Last Crusade.
Yeah.
Satipo, just because he's Alfred. Sapito, just because he's Alfred Molina.
Yeah.
And then
Jock.
Jock.
I like Jock. I'm like, memorable. I'm like, he's memorable.
He had that one line and it was memorable.
I'm like, Jock, the airplane guy.
With the pet snake.
Yep, he's a pilot. Worked for him.
So, shall we get into the conversation about Indiana Jones 5?
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about that.
So,
what is one thing you'd like to see?
I want to see him go back to, the religious artifact.
I agree, because that's, I'm like, well, if you want to say, 2 out of the 4 movies are that much better than the other ones, and they are, what is the one common thing?
Besides Indiana Jones, it's the fact that it's like a religious artifact,
like a Bible thing,
or something close to like that. Like, personally, I don't know about you, but the thing I want them to be searching for in the next one would be, what's it called?
The 10 Commandments.
Not the 10 Commandments, because that's actually what the Ark of the Covenant is.
Oh yeah, yep. You're right.
It's the Fountain of Youth.
See, but that's more of
it's not too religious, but it could have the religious tie-ins, and it's a famous enough story for people to be like, oh, Indiana Jones and the Fountain of Youth. I'd watch that.
Okay, all right.
And then I kind of have the storyline where Indiana Jones getting old, Well,
Harrison Ford ain't no spring chicken, man.
Yeah, and I kind of want him to get to get there, and then him turn around and be like, you know what, I've lived my life, it's time for someone else to take my place. And then it's him handing the fedora to the next Indiana Jones.
Mm-hmm.
And is there any certain actors you'd like to see casted in the movie?
This is tough for me because I know Shia LaBeouf would be interesting to have back, because it kind of did hint that he would be the next one.
Do you think they would bring back LaBeouf, or do you think they'd recast it?
That's tough because LaBeouf was riding high off of the first Transformers. I'm like, he was not bad in that one.
I mean, he has had some pretty good projects as of late, at least for what I heard.
He's different. He's a different cat, and I'm like, it could work. I'm like, Harrison Ford is a different cat.
And it's like, will they? Like, I heard he's kind of problematic around set. Do you think they would bring him back?
Do I think they would? It depends.
Because to be honest, I see more of a recasting if they end up bringing back.
I think so. Who do you think would be an interesting Indiana Jones mutt?
I'm gonna be honest. For some reason, I always have Chris Pratt in my mind.
Chris Pratt's busy with Garfield and Mario, so like he's like, I'll do these other projects. Thank you.
It's like, I think Chris Pratt would be a decent enough casting.
You know what?
Like, he kind of has that Indiana Jones look to him. I mean, he was in Jurassic World. He was in Guardians of the Galaxy.
True.
I mean, he just seems like he would be a good fit for an Indiana Jones movie.
All right, this is the first thought that came to my mind. Jake Gyllenhaal. Jake Gyllenhaal would be I think he'd be different as
interesting,
like an Indiana Jones as mutt or whatever they would do.
Only thing I'd say with Jake Gyllenhaal is, does he have like the Indiana Jones look?
I can see him in it. I can see him in it right now. In my mind, my mind's eye, Preston. I can see him in it, and it's beautiful.
I'm intrigued by it. I will say that.
You think that's a good pick, though?
I'm intrigued.
Telling you.
I'm never one to judge a casting before I see the movie.
You know, that's the thing.
I hate it when people do it. You know, you're seeing it now with the Uncharted movie. People kind of hating on the Mark Wahlberg and Tom Holland casting.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't judge castings before I see the movie. Because, I mean, you know what other person was being berated for taking up a character?
Who's that?
Heath Ledger.
True. Because he was like a rom-com guy, wasn't he?
Yeah. People, when Heath Ledger was casted as Joker, everyone was kind of shaking their head at it. Like, oh, you're going to get this pretty boy to play a serious character like the Joker? I mean, hit it out of the park. Another one, Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man. Another one that was criticized. It's
That's
like,
true.
Now, those two are people you couldn't see playing that, like anyone else playing that character.
They're iconic roles.
Yeah.
Iconic.
Okay, so for the new Indiana Jones 5 movie coming out in 2023, do you want it to be a passing the torch movie, or do you just want it to be the final Indiana Jones movie?
Well, that's a good question. Because I would really like it if it was a passing the torch movie. Maybe like an Indiana Jones spin-off, perhaps. But to me, I grew up with Indiana Jones, and like going to go see Kingdom of the Crystal Skull in the theater, as much maligned as the movie was, is one of my favorite memories as a kid. Because I was telling you about this the other day. My parents, like, if there was a trailer on TV and we were watching something, they'd flip it. They didn't want to know anything about what was going on, and I think it would be. Oh, I'd almost cry. I think if they were like, Indiana Jones dies, if Harrison Ford dies in that movie.
See, now I don't think they would kill him. I kind of hope
they don't have the balls for that.
If they kill Indiana Jones in that movie, honestly, that's just disrespectful.
I say we riot, man. We riot.
Honestly, what I want to see is him passing the fedora in the whip-off to someone else.
But he dead in the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
I don't want him dead. I don't want him dead, though. I want him retiring on his own terms.
That's the Indiana Jones way to go about it.
Like, I'm so indifferent about the Crystal Skull, because The Last Crusade was the perfect ending.
He got married and like he settled down, and that's why I'm like,
But that's the thing. The Last Crusade I thought was perfect. It left a mystery for what Indiana Jones will do in the future, but it was him just riding off into the sunset.
That's where I'm like, it kind of it was meant to be done. It's like there.
It's very satisfying.
Yeah, I watched this and I'm like, well,
it's the original.
I hope they don't make another movie.
It's like, it's the original, just riding off into the sunset.
And that's where I remember watching that. just the other day, and I was like, and they never made another Indiana Jones movie again. I'm like, but they did.
And it wasn't good.
Hey, that's your opinion, and that's why we're talking about it.
Also, are there any other things that you would for sure want in the next movie?
Marion.
I agree. We need to bring back Marion. The actor's still alive. The actress
Marion
is still
Jones.
Yeah.
Marion Jones.
She needs to be in the movie. And you have a character arc end for Senior. You have a character arc end for Marcus Brody. You're probably going to end the Indy storyline. You know who we haven't got an end of the storyline for?
Who?
Sala.
You're like, he just digs
nowhere to be found in the fourth movie. Not even a mention.
What the hell?
John Rhys Davies is still alive. I want to see John Rhys Davies in the next Indiana Jones movie.
You want old Sala?
Yeah, I want an
All
old
right.
Sala. Even if it's just for 5 minutes.
You're like fan service.
It's like, and fan service is fine. No,
what if
I
they
don't
kill Sala? Would you cry? Be honest.
Yeah, I would cry.
You'd be like ugly cry or like 2 little tears cry?
2 tears cry.
Okay.
2 tears crying in the theater.
Y'all, he's capping. He would ugly cry. He'd be like, Sala. With
It's
the
like
lip curl too.
But have you noticed that like they had a story arc end for everyone in the Crystal Skull except for Sala?
Yes.
And I guess that always didn't sit well with me when I watched it again
As
yesterday.
a Sala fan yourself, you're
Yeah.
like, this doesn't work for me.
It's like it's like they like short ended Sala's role in 3. But he was a pinnacle part in 3.
He was.
And he was just
you
kind of
like him? I don't like him.
he was just cast off to the side. So I think we need to see Sala in 4 or 5. I mean,
Return of the Sala. Return of the Sala. I'd pay for that. Well, I think it's time to close out here, folks. I just opened my phone. It was a picture of me at 12 again. I was like, God damn it. Well, folks, Gabriel Sexton here saying, I'd like to thank everyone for listening to the debut episode of Prestin Sexton. We encourage our audience to like this video, sub to the channel, of course, share the video with your friends and family. By God, please share it. And for the Spotify audience, massive Spotify audience we're going to have. Probably not, but life goes on.
Hey, you never know.
No, that's true. That's why you do it, right? We ask for you to follow the show, recommend this podcast to anyone you think you would enjoy the show.
Which is everyone, of course.
Which is everyone, clearly. Thank you for tuning in today. We are Prestin Sexton saying good night and good luck.